Hey, this is Tiger. Welcome to my stream. ZD Radar Traxx. Yes, Traxx, Startschuss, the starting gun. Your beloved Traxx locomotive, the locomotives that used to rule the early years of train sim world in terms of freight trains in Germany, in terms of pulling Dosto trains, the 146, the 185, the Traxx 2. Yeah, old school. Now we're getting it into context today that we have the 147 since the 9th, I think. So it has been 3 days that it is out. It is actually quite difficult at the moment to really keep track of all the releases and everything that is happening. Acura 94, moin to you. Sanda 2020 hello. Thank you for your first appearance on my chat. And this is what we're going to do today. We're going to Stuttgart Heilbronn. You can't read it because the loading screen is still on there. We're doing the unboxing of the Baureihe 147, the Traxx 3, the second Traxx 3 that we have in the game. We all remember that Skyhook Games released in the Times of Train Sim World 2 Rush Hour a version of the Traxx 3 187, the F40 AC3 version of the Traxx locomotive that did not really go down well with the player base. I think it was one of the least loved locomotives. Hey, Tiger guys. Yeah, it's Baureihe 187. And now we got the 147. So from what I have seen so far, it is actually a nicely driving locomotive. And it's fun. It's convenient. And I thought that is the perfect opportunity to dig into the family tree of the Traxx locomotives, because the whole family is quite a bit confusing, especially since the numbering is all over the place with the Traxx 1 and Traxx 2 variant, with the 146 dot something and the 185 dot something. My favorite tracks to drive in the game, definitely the newest one. The other ones are a bit outdated. Actually, my favorite one is the 186, and that one is not in Train Sim World so far, but in SimRail and City Radar number 1. We don't talk about the 187. Well, it's in the presentation that we get to later, so we'll talk about it a bit. But I will try not to bash it too hard, because I think it got bashed hard enough over the years, and well, it is what it is. And what is it to the trains? If you're looking for the rail journey for the 147, then you have to look at Stuttgart Heilbronn, and there you find an on-track journey. It is called 3 chapters, on your marks, introduction, 2 timetable runs. Always introductions annoy me because it is sometimes hard and sometimes impossible to get the platinum score. Then timetable runs, and then 3 scenarios: Conga, Trackside, Recovery, White Grapes. You can see I did not play a lot because with all the DLCs coming on the market, I'm totally behind everything. So I just gave it a quick spin up and down Stuttgart Heilbronn and back again. And the introduction, and maybe we'll stop with the scenario. So let's see what kind of scenarios are coming into view here. So the new ones will be that. Added it to my blue fleet, says City Radar. Yes, did you make a blue livery for it? That is nice. I just get Drahi version of it, and he has 3: the Vectron, the... What was the other one that you had the other day in blue? Ah, I forgot. Rated for 30 minutes. I don't know if that is actually what it is. Konga is putting them together. Different story. We had this problem with dead in tow locomotives with the class 90, and the rescue teams are on scenario. Let's play this one. Let's play Trackside Recovery. You should do a stream on all the markings on the side of the trains. I sort of understand them, but I don't know what some are on about. Ah, yeah. Sometimes we're doing stuff like this. Not all the markings, but we have done a bit about brake markings. So you can see what kind of brake system the train is running or the vehicle is running. And other markings that you need to calculate the Bremshundertstel. Markings on freight cars. Afternoon, driver. A call has come in about a stranded unit. Head over there and help out. Alright. Always happy to help out. We are a single locomotive. Yes, we are a light running locomotive. So activate the the driver's compartment. That is actually a new thing to do that we usually don't. It is one of the reverses where you just push buttons at the train brake to running. Don't we have... this is already cut in. Well, obviously I have to take care of the safety systems myself. The scenario won't. Train brake. Running. Alright. Can I use the AFB from here without setting anything? Alright. We got an AFB holding brake. You can see how the brake cylinders are filling as soon as I am setting any speed with the AFB. No confirm is needed here on this locomotive. And if you want to see your driving motors on our BO Prime locomotive with 4 driving motors, you can hit the button with the KN for kilonewtons, what typically represents traction. As soon as we apply some power, the train will release the AFB holding brake, drain the brake cylinders, and you can see that we are applying some power. PZB is limiting us to 40. We're shunting speed anyway. We're passing this SH1 signal, and now we're getting full line signal 40 from here, and expect slow again. HV system, rudimentary speed signaling, 1000 Hertz monitoring from the PCB because of the VR2, the diagonal signal that announced us that the next signal will require us to be slow again. This is a full-blown distance signal that we're getting here, even though we got already a distance signal. With a short braking distance. This is what the white light is for. Is there a length counter? I have not found one yet, a length counter, to be honest. I can't say that I am familiar enough with this locomotive to know everything that there is, but the usual tricks did not work at any rate. So again, we're going a weird way. We're passing 2 distance signals, both requiring us to go slow. Should they make an expert Vectron? They definitely should make an expert Vectron. Vectron is already one of the most elaborate locomotives in the game, and well, it is a locomotive that is ubiquitous. So definitely we actually need a expert version of that one. Again, SH1 on a high stick signal. And now we're getting another 40 signal. As long as we don't have an Ebola or a Buchverplan, we don't know whether this is a signal that allows us to go maybe even 50 or 60. So I will stick with the 40 since we're going a weird way out anyway. Next one is supposed to be clear though. So now we can accelerate the line speed. Lights should work automatically. Those are supposed to be red, I gather. Any rate, it is the lamps that should show the red light, but with this evening gloom, it is often really difficult to see colors. And CD Raider says, this is a great locomotive, but Vectron is still the best in the game. I especially like the feature that it can automatically monitor and not exceed 40 and 20 speeds during PCB monitoring. Yeah, never tried whether this one is doing this as well. But I think there is rarely a locomotive that William put so much time and effort in. Nope, you tried it? Alright. So finally, in case we have not left the anschließenden Weichenbereich yet, now we have. And we are, if I'm not mistaken, the 100 limit, even a 120. Yeah, this is interesting. This is actually something that I have not seen so far. We will see if this holds true to freight trains, that we can actually go on a 120 with freight trains and light running locomotives. So far, every freight train was limited to 100, what was annoying because then you lost all the dynamics between 120, 110, 100. Even on a PZBM train, you were limited to 100 by the game or otherwise go booked. And I figured it out the hard way. Well, most probably it will happen to me as well. When I'm looking around in the world instead of looking at the signs. Yeah, it really drives chummy, this locomotive. The AFB is your friend typically. The power brake handle. The electric brake works extremely reliably. So, except for actually stopping the train, you rarely need the train brakes. We need a route with ETCS level 2 in the game. Yeah, well, we need a route with a properly working ETCS. So far it's only Rivet, Lucerne, Sursee. First try, what is not bad for a first try, but not good enough for really being so bold as saying we have ETCS in the game. If there's one thing Trains of World should take from SimWorld, it's the ability to adjust camera one seat position. Yeah, leaning backwards, forwards, that is actually a good thing. And ETCS is another thing that they should adapt from it. Spectre, another one with ETCS after Lucerne. Yeah, you said it. Yeah. Actually, in my opinion, they can learn a lot from SimRail. Well, that is the good thing, right? We have two really nice, or at least two, there might be even more, surely are more, but 2 really nice train simulations on the market. And even with all the hiccups and other stuff, Train Sim World is a great simulation, or well, it's a great game, let's put it that way. And I don't have to defend it as a simulation. Limit dropping to 110, and this is a thing that you can do with your dynamic brakes. ETCS route or just a French route? I would love French routes, and well, French routes, not only high-speed TGV, but with a lot of French signaling, French intercity trains, more or less, regional trains. And the graphics and look of this game are unmatched. Yeah, that's true. And I have to repeat that again. I am playing with a plain vanilla ini file now, engine ini file, after the Medway Valley DLC. Suffered a couple of crashes with the ini tweaks that I used to run. But I'm still running it with the DX12 command. In case anyone is wondering.
Zugbeeinflussung, 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 Zugbeeinflussung.
You wonder why she repeated herself so much. It's because I hit the key repeatedly with a 90. You never know whether you are above or below the 105, whether you will get a 1000 Hz inspector. What they could do in the first step would be include some other TGV variants in a new timetable on the LGV route. Not too much effort and could change a lot. Yeah, I actually don't know. Look how the water looks in the dying sunlight on the left. That is really nice. And Sander says my main complaint is the memory issues and just how it's horribly operated for PS5. Yeah, optimized. Yeah, I get it. From, well, when you're talking to Matt or the others, then they will always tell you that they're doing so much for the PS5 and memory optimization. I don't understand enough about that, to be honest. But I think that is a big construction site to get this par on the PlayStation 5. And I gather it is not easy to catch it if things are growing out of control. So are we out of our 90 limit? I did not really pay attention. Here we are for quite some time. We're back to 120. The issue is if I spawn in one of Birmingham crew or Birmingham crashes immediately. Yeah, I heard that the Birmingham crew route is very susceptible for crashes of that kind.
Zugbeeinflussung, Zugbeeinflussung.
And apparently they did not have, well, the greatest or an especially bad memory management on that route. I remember this one station, Grove Street, where you're running into a FPS sink. Here's a 110. back to 130, and now it should actually limit us to 120. No, we're going to 130, alright. So this is not a thing that is necessarily for freight trains, but they are treating us to a non-freight train, since we are a light loco, totally correct. So we can do line speed here. So, soon enough they will have to slow us down, only 1.5 kilometer until we're supposed to stop, and that is probably because we are approaching the failed train.
Zugbeeinflussung. 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 Zugbeeinflussung.
And here's the VR0 announcing the red signal. Here is a GPA, a Geschwindigkeitsprüfabschnitt, what you can see from the magnets. Does the auxiliary controls work in trains in world? Never works for me. We will have to try, to be honest. I did not try this on this locomotive. There are a lot of locomotives where the auxiliary controls work, but there are also even more where they don't work, or don't work in a way that you would expect them to work. It's also a thing that you're not technically in charge of the locomotive when you're standing about and not sitting with your bum in the engineer's seat. Here's the 500 Hertz. Good thing we are already below the 40.
Zugbeeinflussung. Zugbeeinflussung.
And here's the red signal. And you see you can totally just slow down with your power brake handle and the dynamic brakes. Contact the signaler to access the formation. Let's see, probably the phone. We have, by the way, a screen that shows us our itinerary, our route. That is quite new. So, what kind of authority did we get to pass this signal? Proceeded restricted speed, so we technically have authority. We did not get any signal, we did not get a V signal, we did not get a SH1 signal, we did not get a SAT signal, we did not get anything. So probably we should have gotten a written order. But unlike in the expert versions,
Zugbeeinflussung.
we are not seeing it.
Zugbeeinflussung. Zugbeeinflussung.
So we had to press the override key so that we can actually pass here. And now we're going on site until we get to the failed train. And then we'll see. I've not played this scenario before, so I have no idea what we will run into. It's my first. And we will see if we can actually rely on what is happening there. If we have to go on site, we are limited to 40, but obviously we can't go faster than with a speed that allows us to stop the train within the piece of track that we can actually see. So we're now going into the track for the opposite direction across the crossover here. It should have been in our written order too. Makes sense, because where actually should the failed train be, if not in the track for the opposite direction? We can already see it. Looks like we're approaching it from the driving trailer.
Sifa.
Yeah, Sifa lady is also here. So, when coupling up to vehicles that may have people in them, you always come to a full stop before coupling, not running into the formation. For coupling purposes. Actually failed. Alright. Then release the brake again. For coupling purposes,
AFB,
probably without the AFB, so that we don't have to fight against the AFB holding brake. Apply some direct brake so that we don't bounce back. And then let's see if we can push into that formation. Alright, I guess we are there. We are there, the couplers are touching, that's a good thing. And now we're coupled. And look, even the jacks for the UIC cables are opening. There are so many locomotives in the game where the covers for the jacks are still closed when the cable is in. Here it actually works. So, what are we supposed to do? Set the train cutout to cutout. Alright. Deactivate the driver's compartment. That one goes probably into hole. And deactivate the driver's compartment. That is off, that is off, that is off, that is off. Probably safety system also off. And 0 to deactivate it. If we forget anything, I think the lights should work automatically. AFB is off. Throttle at 0, brake at full service. Direct brake to hold. I don't know. Maybe it should be to release. But no, it does not stand in release, so it should be to hold. The lights we can... Okay, we can at least walk through the engine room. See, we don't have a modeled engine room, but at any rate... Oh, we don't have Safety system switches on the other side, so only on one side. That is good, and there can be no confusion about that. Sit in the indicated seat. Probably that one. Activate the driver's compartment. Set the reverser to forward. Now we are on that side. Nicely done. Tow this unit back to Heilbronn for the engineers to take a look at. Good. We do this then. Okay, before releasing the brake, we have to cut it in. Then we can actually release it. You can probably use the AFB.
AFB.
So happy you are still up and streaming, Juniper. I'm happy to see you on the chat. Hope you're doing well and have traveled to many nice places in the meantime. So I guess we're held by the AFB holding brake so that we can actually start. We see a green signal, what is good, so we don't have to start in the dark about what our train is. This is the rear of our train. I put it to 40 so that I never forget the PCB starting program. No, being stuck at home, health problems keeping me from traveling. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I hope it's getting better now. Now that we're going into spring.
Zugbeeinflussung. Zugbeeinflussung.
Going back to Heilbronn. What is track limit here? Track limit here 110 rising to 130. So again, if you want to see a driving notice, KN for the driving motors, and then you can see the driving motors. T-radio, you have still pressure in brakes. Yes, I can see that. But why do I have that? Maybe the... It was a... This is the deceiving thing with the AFB holding brake. You think this is the AFB holding brake and it will go away. But it did not go away. Maybe we have to drain the loco brake manually. This is a thing that you need to know for every loco separately, how the loco brake behaves when switching cabs. Well, maybe the guys that are looking will have to look at the failed train, will have to look at our brakes on the loco as well. They left on the lights here. Should have turned them off, I guess. So I don't know if I already passed the switch to the 130, and apparently I have. Limit to 110.
Zugbeeinflussung. Zugbeeinflussung.
Let's see if we can do this with the electric brake here. Even with the whole train sitting in our back. Well, it looks good. I think we can do this. Heel Fountain, yeah. Heilbronn. And 11 kilometers to go, says Spectre. I actually have never understood what in Heilbronn is so healthy and healing. But then I actually might have passed Heilbronn on the motorway close to 100 times, but I am not sure that I ever set foot into the city. Well, so far it actually runs smoothly. It was another increase to 120 that I was reading the chat. And then we will get a limit again to, what is it? 90, yeah. Here it is.
Zugbeeinflussung.
And now we blew it because now we have to slow down below the 80, even though the limit is only 90, because we caught ourselves 1000 hertz. Should have slowed down to 105 before hitting this magnet. Here's a repeater sign. Now we have to wait until the yellow lamp goes off so that we can release and accelerate to the 90 that was announced and is executed here. Because I can never remember if it is Untergruppenbach, Obereisersheim oder Untergruppenbach und Untereisersheim. Yes. Ronnie, hello and good evening. You're the one we have been waiting for. Now that we're talking about German stuff again. Yes. Have you ever driven a 147 Traxx 3? Maybe the 0.5 variant on an intercity train? With the reportedly constantly crashing operating system. Luckily I'm dodging it so far, he says. He sticks to his ICE trains. Yes, we are going to have a full rundown of the Traxx family tonight. Have a nice flight, City Raider, yes. Assuming that Ronnie is playing Flight Simulator on the side, as he has done before. And whiling away the time between takeoff and landing on our stream here. In all fairness and honesty, I wouldn't mind it, but something like a Taurus would be a treat. I guess so. And they are all relatives. The Taurus, the Vectron, the Traxx. They are all descendants of the 120, more or less. We will get to this in the presentation. So we are in the 140 limit section. 6.4 kilometers away from Heilbronn, our stopping point. Well, to be honest, in the game here, this locomotive really runs like like a pussycat. It is super comfy and super soft to drive. Accelerating, braking. I shall head on from Toulouse to Porto in a bit. Just got done with dinner and now I'm too full to move. I'm getting old, man. Okay, we are approaching a VR2 distance signal.
Zugbeeinflussung. Zugbeeinflussung. Zugbeeinflussung.
Have to bring down our speed to 80 in 23 seconds. Otherwise the piece of B will catch us. And then gently have the speed drop to 40 most probably. Since we don't know any better, we prepare for 40. We can already see the signal in the distance. We're still a bit too fast. And slow.
Zugbeeinflussung. Zugbeeinflussung.
She has a weird accent, this woman who says the Zugbeeinflussung. Can't really. Don't really know. The voice is already PMO, he says.
Zugbeeinflussung. Zugbeeinflussung.
We are too slow to get a new 1000 Hertz. Now we can see why we got the HP2 limiting us to 40, because we're rapsing across the switches and probably end up in some yard. Still 2.2 kilometers with 40, as it seems. We're probably already inside the station area, so there is no point in SH1. And Ronnie says 300 across the board tomorrow, sprinting between Munich and Nuremberg all day. All right. That sounds like fun. More high riding SH1 signals. Hebel auf dem Tisch. How many turns does all day make? Ask CD Radar. So, the red of our Dostos is catching the last light of the day as we are running into Heilbronn yard. This is Munich, Nuremberg, Munich, Nuremberg, Munich. It starts in Munich and ends in Munich with twice Nuremberg in between. With some fancy chill time in between, of course. Can't be expected. to watch your train running for that longer time. Uninterrupted. Yes. And we are getting Nuremberg. Soonish Nuremberg. Nuremberg, Ingolstadt in Transom World. I am really looking forward to that one. Alright, here finally is our announced HP2 signal with an VR.
Zugbeeinflussung.
0.
Zugbeeinflussung.
And now it will be interesting how the train actually behaves. How much brake we need to actually stop it. Here again the river. And the water effects in the dying lights, they are really nice. So, can we have broken down overhead wire checking trains too? I would like to have stuff like this. I mean, my route is only 22 kilometers long. I can be easily covered in a whole day. Yeah, it can be. The CD radar. Just imagine you going 300 kilometers per hour and how often you could do the route in a day then. So, that red signal up front is probably not ours, but anyway, we have to stop soon. Can barely reach my top speed in that range. That's Ronnie. So, we're not really getting a proper signal, huh? We are not driving up to our signal. Our signal is a bit around the corner, as it seems. Yeah, maybe 70 meters are still to go. And here we are. Thanks, driver. Hopefully she'll be up and running soon again. Let's see how you did. Let's see how we did. We got our train back to Heilbronn. Oh, we were going too fast. Because that was not a 140 section after all, but it doesn't matter. It is good enough for a platinum medal. .5 minutes. Nice to see you. Yes. Alright. We're going back into the main menu and I'm preparing the presentation. Trains 01. First, we're doing some recap anyway in the presentation. And I will have to switch off the game sound, otherwise it will probably drive me mad. You've seen this before. When we were talking about the trains from Derby in England, we went through the history of ASEA, the Swedish company, and Brown Boveri and Company from Switzerland, merging in 1988 to BBC, BB, and R to RBB. ASEA Brown Boveri. They bought Brel in England. That was what we were talking about in the video about the Derby Lichurch Lane works, where the Turbo Stars and the Electro Stars are coming from. This is not our topic today, but we also know that Daimler-Benz, who had gathered together a lot of railway-related companies, made a joint venture in 1996 with ABB and gathered together their railway industries in ADtranz, or sometimes written with ADtranz, sometimes with a big T, sometimes with a small d at this point, so that we had ABB Daimler-Benz Transportation under ADtranz, what built a lot of locomotives and trains in the second half of the 1990 decade. The name is, well, somehow built together out of ABB, Daimler-Benz, and the transportation and the ends of Benz. And see, there is someone is wondering if there will be a presentation about Skoda family. If we have enough material to put stickers into the book, I will gladly make a Skoda family book. So then we know that Daimler-Benz did the marriage made in heaven with Chrysler Corporation in 1997, and they bought out ABB to convert ADtranz into Daimler Chrysler Rail Systems first, and then, well, sold the whole affair to Bombardier in 2001, with Bombardier becoming the biggest railway industry producer in the Western Hemisphere. And Daimler-Benz and ADtranz was out of the picture, and that lasted for the first 2 decades of the new millennium until Bombardier got in trouble and had to sell the railway department to the French people from Alstom, who couldn't have the merger with Siemens Mobility in 2019, and got the railway industry from Bombardier in 2021. This is why a lot of trains that we know from ADtranz in the beginning then were built by Bombardier, and in the end are now built by Alstom. This is not because the locomotives or the trains moved around, but because of the mergers and acquisitions in the corporate level of the whole affair. That is the corporate history background, and now let's see where the technology comes in, where the lines of developments are, starting with the Baureihe 120 to the EuroSpinter and the Traxx. A couple of weeks ago we did a presentation and a video about the Einheitslokomotiven that the Deutsche Bundesbahn used in the second half of the 20th century with the 110 and those locomotives around that, and with tap changer technology, electric locomotives most of the time, with the 140, with the 150, and the never built old 101 locomotive that was then more or less made into the 103. All those nice old rolling stock from the second half of the 20th century, until they were more or less replaced by more modern ones. And what did they have in common? They were still running on commutator driving motors that used brushes, either direct current or a one-phase alternating current. Up until then, in, well, about late 80s, beginning 90s, the first locomotives with asynchronous AC induction motors came on the market, and the first one of them was the Baureihe 120. To get to the Traxx line, we have to start with the Baureihe 120, built by a consortium of different companies in Germany. ABB, what we've talked about in the rundown for the corporate history. Henschel, what was at this time already part of Daimler-Benz, Krauss-Maffei, and Krupp. Companies that are somehow related to the military industrial complex in Germany, but also did some railway stuff, at least at the time. And they came up in 1979, and then 1980, early 1980s, they were running around with the first prototypes of the Baureihe 120. 5 locomotives were built in the pre-series variants, different versions for tryouts and stuff. That is the .1 series, and then the regular series of those locomotives had the numbers starting with 120.1. 60 of them were built together or in addition to the 5 pre-series locomotives, and well, over the years they were pushed around, used for something different, modified slightly. The prototype locomotives were sometimes used for fixing overhead wires or controlling them, got 700 numbers. Inspector says, to me, the 120 is still one of the most elegant locos ever built. Maybe that is because of the Märklin model that came out in the early 80s, and my dad had this. Very interesting. Well, they have a very significant form that you can also find in the 628 trains on the Niedertalbahn. Those vehicles got this telltale bend in their chassis, and actually between the pre-series locomotives, the design was slightly altered in that way, so the bend got put into a different place. Very interesting. And that was the first locomotive on the market built in series that was running around with AC induction motors, asynchronous induction motors, no longer commutator motors, but 3-phase AC induction motors. The technology is already much older, obviously, but you had to get to making those power electronics to control this type of driving engines lighter and cheaper, so that you can actually use it on locomotives that are built en masse. Not really en masse, 60 is not that many, but it is a locomotive in series. And that was in the 1980s, the 120. By now, they have all been retired or sold to somewhere. At least the Deutsche Bahn is no longer using them. But they are still, well, the godmother of all the 3-phase AC locomotives running around in Europe, because you can see the Traxx line developed from it. We will see that the EuroSpinter Vectron line developed from this locomotive, and also the 101 with the ALP 45 locomotives in New Jersey, more or less have lines connecting it with the technology used in the 120. In the early 90s, then, the Deutsche Bahn was looking for, well, some more diversified, more modern versions of a locomotive that use this technology, and they actually tendered out 3 different prototypes that were developed from this early locomotive. Krauss Maffei, then dominated by Siemens, used this technology in this locomotive to build one locomotive for Spain, the Renfe Series 252, and Portugal. And out of this, there's more or less one line of development where they built a prototype of a Baureihe 127, what is the first EuroSprinter locomotive, what later became the Taurus ES EuroSprinter 64P. Only one prototype existing of that, but that was in 1992. That was the baby that Siemens hatched. Whereas, yeah, and this ended, let's go on this way, into the Baureihe 152 that you can still see around a lot on German tracks pulling freight trains. What is then the ES64F? Better known as the Baureihe 152, what is the, well, a descendant of the 120, but in itself the mother of all the EuroSpinter and Vectrons that came out of it, including the Taurus, including that. So that is where the Siemens line of development comes from, the 152, and those locomotives are far from being or getting retired. On the other side, we had AEG, what was the Daimler-Benz thing going. They had a prototype called the 12X, Baureihe 128 in 1994. Also one locomotive, one prototype only existing, derived from the 120 technology. And that was, so to say, the precursor for the DB Baureihe 145 that we got only recently in Train Sim World as an expert locomotive. And that was Daimler-Benz's, or let's call it AEG. That was dominated by Daimler-Benz at this point. And they developed this line over the 12X and then the 145, whereas ABB Henschel until 1995 not together with Daimler-Benz and AEG did not have a prototype, so they had to come up with something new, and they developed the 101 that we have in the game as two locomotives, the regular one and the expert version. So in 1995-ish, around that time, we had three competing trees of locomotives. The 145, what became the mother of all the Traxxes, the 152, what became the mother of all the EuroSprinters and Vectrons, and the 101 that stuck around in itself, but there is actually not a full line of development from this locomotive, probably because in 1995 Daimler-Benz, AEG and ABB Henschel got together and joined their forces in ADtranz before they sold the whole thing to Bombardier. So the 145 and the 101 got more or less into the same pot, and was developed further was the 145 more or less from the 101. Only the more or less unlikely descendants that run around in the United States of America and Canada are known. The ALP 46 that we have in the game in the New York Trenton DLC for the first time, and now on the Morristown line, and the deluxe locomotive for Train Sim World 6 for the Morristown line, the ALP 45 DP dual power. They can do diesel and overhead catenary electric. Yeah, and now we are getting closer to the Traxx line. That was the 145 was more or less a freight locomotive from the outset in the beginning, and then they developed a version of it for DB Regio, for passenger traffic on regional trains, and that is a locomotive that is still not a Traxx. At least it was never designated as a Traxx locomotive, but very close to it already. And it is the 146.0. So here with the 146, Baureihe 146 is a bit deceptive because the .0 is not a Traxx. The 146.1 is a Traxx 1. The 146.2 is a Traxx 2. And the 146.5 can be a Traxx 1 or a Traxx 2. So the numbering is here all over the place. It does not really fit together with the development of the locomotives, and shows that developing those locomotives got away from the train operating companies like the Deutsche Bundesbahn, and was developed more or less into a thing that the industry did. Detached from the train operating companies, or developing the vehicles for different countries, different train operating companies, and so on. So what was the first Traxx locomotive then? First Traxx locomotive that was called a Traxx locomotive was then the Baureihe 185.0. That also includes the numbers with .1, includes the locomotive with .200, and then the numbers in the .501 to 557. The fiver, the .5 and .6 numbers typically were locomotives that were not in the beginning sold to the Deutsche Bahn, but to different train operating companies where they were moved around a bit, in this accounts for this chaotic numbering here. This locomotive was then called as a Traxx locomotive, the F140 AC1, built since 1999. F means freight, and 140, typically you have the F140 and the P160, slightly connected with the top speed that these locomotives are rated for. 140 for freight locomotives, 160 for passenger locomotives, and the difference is typically in the bogies and the way how the driving motors are fixed to the wheel sets and the bogies. And the passenger versions typically have the more expensive setup that allows you to go a bit faster. So it depends whether the engine or the driving motor is actually resting on the wheel set or whether it is fixed to the bogie, so that it is part of the locomotive that is suspended, and therefore the whole thing can run a bit faster. So that is a thing that goes through the whole line of development of the Traxx locomotives, what kind of bogies you have, and whether you have a Tatzlagerantrieb or a Hohlwellenantrieb, without going into the details here. The one thing can go faster than the other, and those locomotives were the first locomotives that were called trucks. Since those locomotives, we have the name Traxx, and for the passenger version with the P160 AC1, AC for alternating current, because AC, three-phase AC locomotives, and number one because the first generation. And those are 185.0.1, .200, .501 to 557, and for the passenger we have the 146.1, and also 10 locomotives in the .5 range. So here we can already see the 146.0 pre-Traxx, 146.1 first Traxx. In the first generation of Traxx locomotives, there are also some weirder kits. There were sometimes in the years to come designated by Bombardier as Traxx locomotive. There was a Traxx locomotive that was called a P160 DC, so a DC variant for direct current, with P for power head. One of the few Traxx locomotives ever built that does not have a cap on either end, but only a cap on one end, like most of the American locomotives. And this thing was built for the Italian market, designated there as an E.464. Totally different thing, a Traxx H80 AC. If you find that designation somewhere, it was used sometimes for the impressive locomotives that are typically called the MTAB IORE locomotive, that are running in Sweden in pairs, super heavy 6-axled CO prime locomotives used for pulling super heavy ore trains, coming from ADtranz. Octeon, I think, was the line that they are derived from, and Bombardier at some point in time called them Traxx locomotives. Don't have a lot to do with the Traxx line that we are talking here about. So let's take them out of the picture here again, just for dipping into the more curious locomotives that were designated as Traxx locomotives at the time. So, well, before we go on with the Traxx 2 and the Traxx 2 evolution and the Traxx 3, a short rundown. What is so cool about being an AC traction motor locomotive that uses an asynchronous induction AC motor? We have talked about this on when we talked about the Vectron, when the Vectron came first out, so we have to recap this. So don't be confused by this setup. This is a train that uses a very vintage form of bridge transitioning to control power. What is interesting here is the look at the driving motor that sits on each wheel set here. This yellowish part is the driving motor on each wheel set, and traditionally you had commutator motors that used either DC or later, when it comes to Reihenschlussmotoren, also one-phase AC current. And all these engines work with the principle that you have a rotating thing, that you induce an electromagnetic field by putting wires around it, and then they rotate in a field that is created by the stator, that you also put wires around so that you can create electromagnetic fields. And because the electromagnetic fields create then some torque, you can run your motors. And the problem is that this rotor is rotating, so you cannot have a fixed connection between the current cables. And this is why you have brushes that run here on a sort of terminus, and those brushes are prone to having defects and stuff, and all the stuff that is connected with moving mechanical parts. So this is always the thing about those DC engine traction motors driven by DC or one-phase AC in some kind. And the thing is, you need to have a magnetic field in the rotor, you have to have a magnetic field in the stator, and then you have to deal with this connection here with the brushes. And this led to the idea, wouldn't it be nice if we had a rotating magnetic field? If the magnetic field is rotating, then we don't need brushes. And how can we accomplish this? How can we get a rotating magnetic field without having to rotate the stator? And the idea was, since ever and is still, to create a seemingly rotating magnetic field by putting at least 3 pairs of coils in a way that you can switch on a pair after the other and then create a seemingly rotating magnetic field. And this is why those locomotives in German are called Drehstromlokomotiven, rotating current locomotives, because actually not the current is rotating, but the magnetic field. But that is not so much the problem. So how do you build a motor out of this? You will have a rotor that is typically built like a squirrel cage here in the middle, like a round contraption where you put conductive parts in a way that you can create a lot of rotating current in this rotor, and the magnetic field around the rotor creates the current in the rotor that leads to creating a magnetic field of its own in the rotor. And if you then move the magnetic field around the coils, then the magnetic field in the rotor tries to align with the magnetic field, never catches up. This is why it's called an asynchronous motor. You have to have a certain slip, otherwise you would lose your induction and then the power. But the almost catching up is enough to create a traction force and to turn this axle and create the locomotive. And to have this magnetic field rotate, you have three different lines, the red one, the yellow one, and the green one. And you have to send a certain formed alternating current in it. You have to have alternating current for yellow, for green, and for red in sine waves merged together. And this is why this is the three-phase AC. The green phase, the red phase, the yellow phase. And if they are spaced like this in thirds, then if the green phase is at the positive maximum, the red one is at the 0 point and the yellow one is at the negative maximum. And so the whole thing works itself around the full circle. Green maximum, red maximum, yellow maximum, and so on. And then we have a rotating thing. And to create this kind of rotating current, of formed current, you need to have the equipment, the power electronics that can create this sort of current. And then you have an AC traction motor. It is asynchronous because the rotor is always slower than the magnetic field. It is an induction motor because you create the current in the rotor by the magnetic fields and not by sending actually a current via a cable into the rotor, therefore getting rid of the brushes. And it is often called a squirrel cage motor because the rotor looks like a squirrel cage, where a squirrel can run in the wheel, or a hamster, or whatever little rodent can do this. Drehstromlok, that's the German name because the whole thing creates this turning magnetic field. Obviously, you need a device to create this kind of current because you're not getting it from the overhead catenary. The overhead catenary gives you one phase AC, so you have some sort of a solid state semiconductor device that creates by typically pulse width modulation this three-phase AC. And that is typically called a VFD or VVVF drive, variable frequency drive, variable voltage, variable frequency drive. And then you can modulate the frequency by, well, and the frequency is so when the top parts of each wave will come, how often in a certain time interval, and you can modulate the voltage, so how far away, how much amplitude you actually have, so how far away the maximum is from the 0 point. And by modulating frequency and voltage, you can control the turning speed of your motor, and you can also control the turning force, the torque of your motor. And as I said, this is typically done by an inverter that has to have switches that switch very fast, and those were in the beginning typically GTO, gate turn on, thyristors, and later than IGBTs. For that. And this is the magic of the Drehstromlok, of the asynchronous traction motor, and what makes it superior to the locomotives that we had before, the DC locomotives stuff. Sorry, I must have blinked. How did we get from tracks to motors? We got to the motors because I wanted to recap what is so great about the locomotives that started with the 120 and the Drehstrom locomotive, and what makes them so much more powerful than the locomotives that we had before. This is where we got to motors and the trucks and the EuroSprinters and the 120. They are always connected with the asynchronous AC induction motor. Now we're getting back from the motors to the Traxx 2. We have seen the Traxx 1 already, and then the new Traxx 2 version with modified chassis and stuff. And now I'm splitting between the freight variants on top and the passenger variants in the bottom. The freight variants typically already in the beginning capable of running under two different voltage systems, always overhead catenary, but not only the German 15 kV with 16 to third hertz, but also 25 kV with 50 hertz, like in France, and not the black one, yeah. The Traxx 2 is then the 185.2, also the dot 3. Dot 3 is actually the first locomotive that I ever stepped in real life to have a look at the cab and all the installations. That was one of those locomotives here. And then the designations of dot 4 in a certain range, dot 5 in a certain range, dot 6, dot 7. And those are typically the locomotives that are not running for the Deutsche Bahn, but for leasing companies or other train operating companies. And that leads us to the 185.5 that we have in the game with the MRCE black livery, and also the one from the Tarantarampe with the 185.6 for rail pool. But those are all the identical locomotives, more or less. Those are all F40 AC2 Traxx 2 locomotives. And those dominated the early years of train sim world, obviously. In the passenger section, we had the 146.2, or is now the third locomotive that comes with the 146.2 with the 146 number being not a Traxx, being a Traxx 1, and this then is the Traxx 2, and this is a locomotive that is almost everywhere on the early train sim world. German routes, right? There are also dot 3 designated ones that were bought a bit later, and a couple of them were bought for intercity trains. They were actually painted in this intercity gray with the red stripe, but we don't have them in the game. A couple of them were also built for Hungary, the MAV with the 480 series of this P160 AC2 variant. They also started a multi-system variant for Switzerland, ending up as the series 484 that can do not only those two voltage systems that I said, but they can also run on 4 different voltage systems in one locomotive. This is the Traxx 2, quite concise actually, only the numbering is quite all over the place, and those locomotives ruled train sim world in the early ages. Then there is not a Traxx 3 step, but this is the intermediate step, Traxx 2 Evolution, where they started actually with the multi-system, evolutioned it, and this ended up as the Bauer 186 that we know from a sim rail, because we can run it as an E186 there for the on Polish tracks. The Deutsche Bahn does not really have locomotives of that kind, if I'm not mistaken. And those locomotives are the locomotives that you can buy if you want in different setups already, quite modular. And if you want to run them in Germany, Austria, and Poland, then you have to order it in the DAPL variant and so on. If you want to go to France and Belgium and the Netherlands, then you have to order this variant and so on. Unfortunately, we don't have it in Train Sim World. The 186, quite interesting to drive, different way of joysticking this locomotive than the way we drive the Traxx 2 locomotives. Not in the game. Under the evolution era, we also got the first DC locomotives from the F140 versions, again for the Italian market, for I think 3 kV DC out of the overhead catenary. That also works very well in Poland. We have a broad gauge version for Spain, Series 253, and we also got the first diesel electric locomotives of the Traxx variety, F40 DE, DE not for Germany, Deutschland, but for diesel electric, and that will be the Baureihe 285 freight diesel Traxx 2 Evolution, Baureihe 285. On the passenger front, we also got diesel electric locomotives for passenger trains with the P160 with the better and faster bogies. And that is the Baureihe 246. A variant of this is the P160 diesel electric multi-engine ME, running as Baureihe 245, also a locomotive that you can find a lot of on German tracks. And of that kind, we don't have anything in the game. We don't have a diesel electric Traxx anywhere, neither the 285 nor the 246 nor the 245. That is also a thing that is quite open. And what is the idea about this ME, about this multi-engine? On the classic diesel electric locomotive, you have one fat diesel engine, one prime mover, and obviously you cannot switch it off every now and then when you are waiting in front of a red signal or at the station. You are running the full heavy diesel engine prime mover, and the idea about the multi-engines is that you only have 4 smaller diesel engines running on your locomotive, and if you need a lot of power, then you have to use all of them, and if you only need a little amount of power, then you can switch off up to 3 of your multi-engines, of your 4 diesel engines, and only live with one, what can make it more effective in consumption of diesel fuel and also for maintenance work. That all came with the Traxx 2 Evolution era. And now we're getting to close the circle back into what we were just driving in our DLC here. Now we're in the Traxx 3 line. First one is the F140 AC3, the ill-famed 187, at least in the game. In Transcend World it is ill-famed. In real world I don't think that is actually ill-famed. Also in the version of the 187.1 for the Deutsche Bahn since 2015, and the passenger version of the whole thing with the P160 bogies is the one that we're driving here, the Baureihe 147. And one version of this is the 147.5. They come in the intercity livery gray with the red stripe and are pulling around intercity train sets, can do push-pull trains, and well, are famous for always crashing their operating systems. But you can see them a lot, at least where I am traveling on the railways. You can see those trains a lot with the 147.5 pulling an intercity train. Intercity Dostos moving around a lot still, and the 187 is for freight. This version also went to Israel in a 25 kV variant with smooth sides, not those sides that we know from the 187 and the 147, where you can actually put some sort of advertisement panes on it more easily. What is also new to the Traxx 3 line is that you can get your locomotives in a last mile version, and you can add an LM behind your designation of the locomotive, and that means that you actually have, well, it's called a last mile battery. Actually, it's a small diesel engine. Same concept that we know from the Dragon, the Nevak Dragon, on SimRail, or the Asuma version that we have on the East Coast mainline in Train Sim World, that you don't have a full diesel power for running your trains on diesel, but in case that you run out of electricity, you can at least creep home on the last mile battery, and this is more or less optional for every version of the Traxx 3 program. It took a while until we got the DC versions for the Traxx 3, again for the Italian market, the 494. And a bit later even the multi-system version. And here you can see we have now freight locomotives that can, if the rules in that country allow, run the 160. So with the better bogies, so that also the freight version can run 160 or faster. So the 160 is not necessarily limited, especially here for the intercity locomotives that sometimes need to be able to go 200. Even though the 147s are typically limited to 160. Yeah, and those are Bauer 188. Actually, I've never seen one of those locomotives in real life running around. Don't know if there are many. And if so, where they are actually running around. Last Traxx designation that I want to bore you with is the Traxx 23E. Another anomaly, more or less. This is a locomotive built for South Africa. Again, a heavy 6-axle locomotive. For some reason also designated as a Traxx 23E or Traxx Africa locomotive. Putting it here to round up the whole thing. Yes, and this is my sticker book for the Traxx locomotives, what we have already in the game and what not throughout the lines of development. We have the 145 as the precursor for all the Traxxes. We have the 101, the ALP 45, ALP 46 dual power for this line of development, what is more or less a sister to the Traxx. And then we have obviously the EuroSpinter Dispolog versions, 182 Taurus locomotives, and then the Vectron for the Siemens line that more or less developed from the 152 that we don't have in the game yet, and all of them are more or less descendants of the 120. Latest one is the 147, and that one we have been driving so far. And I think we will do a short run on it to conclude this stream. Let's see if we can find a short run. I think I have to turn on the sound again. But not that way. Now we are here again. Perfect. Let's see in what timetable we can actually find it. Not on the 2000, but here on the one from 2018. The 147.0, because the 147.5 is the one for the intercity trains typically. So let's see if we can find something short, like Mannheim to Stuttgart, Bietigheim-Bissingen, Stuttgart Hauptbahnhof. And here we go. GD Cargo and ADtranz has them here as 388, and they are multi-system. 188, all right. So those are, well, the newest Traxx locomotives that you can find, I guess. All right. Don't forget to activate the cab. And then reverser probably. Doors open. Safety systems.
Zugbeeinflussung.
Anything I need to do? The lights are on. The idea about this form of the side is that you can put easily like paints on the side so that you don't have to repaint your locomotive or put like foils on them every time they change their owner. But so far it has not been used a lot.
Sehr geehrte Reisende, herzlich willkommen im Zug ERE nach Stuttgart Hauptbahnhof. Wir wünschen Ihnen eine angenehme Reise. Nächste Station Ludwigsburg. Ausstieg.
My brake is not cut in. Yes. That's the thing. Because in the scenario before it was already cut in when I wanted to cut it in. And now I have to wait until it is out of the whole train before I apply some power. Yeah, don't forget to switch here on the timetable runs. That's the other thing that I learned the hard way. Yeah. And you see that I'm learning it the hard way again. Actually, we talked about it on the class 90, right? To lock off the driver's brake valves, and this is the way you do it in this locomotive, how to lock them off. And AFB is not on, and I guess the AFB is not on just because of that reason. But then
AFB, 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 AFB.
now it seems to work.
AFB.
Because I had not released my brakes properly before starting.
Zugbeeinflussung. Zugbeeinflussung.
Look what's to the left there. The old locomotives that come with the E94.
Zugbeeinflussung.
Temporary speed
Zugbeeinflussung.
restriction coming up. Just know that we wanted to get to speed. We have to live with this limit to 70. Here is the temporary speed restriction. And here it ends. Yay, I've driven 147 kilometers on this locomotive. I'm actually supposed to stop at Ludwigsburg, aren't we? Not? Well, then we stop at Ludwigsburg. We're in 20. Passing Asberg.
Sie fahren. Zugbeeinflussung. Zugbeeinflussung.
Oh, we're actually quite late. How did that happen?
Zugbeeinflussung. Ausstieg in Fahrtrichtung rechts.
Sie fahren.
Oh no, the people in Louis Castle will be angry, as you say it. You name it, Spectre. They will be angry that we got to their place late. Ludwigsburg. It takes quite long to release the brakes. That is the only thing that is a bit something that you have to get used to.
Sie
Dear people of Ludwigsburg, unfortunately we are a bit late. But the most important thing is that we made it in one piece.
Sehr geehrte Reisende, herzlich willkommen im Zug ERE nach Stuttgart Hauptbahnhof. Wir wünschen Ihnen eine angenehme Reise. Nächste Station Stuttgart Hauptbahnhof. Ausstieg in Fahrtrichtung links.
No stop until we get to Stuttgart. Is Ludwig a name of the ghost of Burg? Is there a ghost? Probably. It's typically the ghost that the Burg is named after. Now we're passing the depot at Kornwestheim. Every burg should have a ghost. That is true. In Czech, is there a difference between a burg and a castle? I don't know. I don't think so. In German, there's a difference between a Schloss and a burg. Yes, there is between Schloss and Burg. That's interesting. My keep and castle. And the same word for a Schloss is the same as for a lock. Ah, for a lock, like in a channel, right? Is it not the King Ludwig? Is it the one with Neuschwanstein? I would not have thought so, to be honest, because the Ludwig with Neuschwanstein is a Bavarian king. What would a Bavarian king do here?
Zugbeeinflussung. Zugbeeinflussung.
I'd rather think that it is French influenced Ludwig's. Exactly my thought. What would the king do there? Especially what would be the people in Schwaben do with the Bavarian king? So, I don't know, obviously, but I would rather suspect a French influence here.
Zugbeeinflussung.
Now that we're getting to Stuttgart Feuerbach, Spectre, you can explore the connection between Ludwig Feuerbach, who probably does not have anything to do with Stuttgart Feuerbach and Ludwigsburg at all. That is steep, Spectre. I have not thought of Louis Fire Creek, but there was no stop and tail 101s are not very realistic. Yeah. The sandwiching. I don't know why they built those formations like this. It's very typical for Vectrons, probably also typical for the 147.0s. Oh, is there really a word? Der Ruine in German, yes. Ruine is a very nice word in German. Obviously corresponding with the ruin word in English. Risen from ruins. Auferstanden von Ruinen. Well, I guess those are different kinds of ruins.
Zugbeeinflussung. Zugbeeinflussung.
Well, there you have a Schloss, then a Burg, and after a long time it will be a Ruine, yes. It's funny, at least in Germany, in German, those places can actually be called, instead of Burg Weideck, Ruine Weideck. So it's then in the name of the place. So now we're getting into Stuttgart Hauptbahnhof with the FPS thinking that is usually involved. And with this arcane drop to 30, that should at some point signal with an isolated ZS3, I think. But never is. Here's another sandwich train.
Nächste Station, Stuttgart Hauptbahnhof. Ausstieg in Fahrtrichtung links. Diese Zugfahrt endet dort. Wir bitten alle Fahrgäste auszusteigen. Vielen Dank für Ihre Reise.
I think here we should get the number 3. Because now we are dropped to 3 without having noticed it. Tunnel to Stuttgart Tief. Sending in a 110 to the left. Always nice. Or a 111. What is it? It's a 111 most probably. Didn't see it properly at any rate. That on-board announcement is quite like the real thing, is it not? Thank you for traveling with Deutsche Bahn missing. Yeah, that's true. Also this weird, overpronounced accent and vielen Dank für Ihre Reise. And that is what it sounds like. So, as late as we've been in Ludwigsburg, now we're almost perfectly on time. Zugdeckungssignal is open. Can only protect a very, very short train here. Well, the Czech announcement in Liberec also has the strangest accent I've ever heard. That is so weird how you only hear this. Oh, I locked the doors on the wrong side. The problem with jumping out with your camera. Yes. So actually I'm really happy with this locomotive. It's fun to drive. If you're not tired of running around the DOS stores in the first place, then it's probably a thing that you should get. Ah, they finally got the headlights right on the 147. On the 187, the upper lights were lit. Yeah, I guess a lot of things got better. Good work. These DLCs are getting better. Yes, I think so. Most of the time they even get the checks correctly, so now the sockets are opening. Guys, I think I conclude the stream here. Thank you for staying with me, talking to me, bearing with me, and enjoy the game. We will see if the flood of DLCs will keep coming like that. Don't know if the next thing on the horizon has been announced already, because I'm more or less losing track. Yeah, Japan, but there is not a date, a release date for the Tadami line yet, right? Or did I miss that one too? For Japan, I will have to work. Thanks for the streams. Expect to see you. Thank you guys. See you to and have the greatest of weeks. Take care. Bye bye.